They said that in that town, no one carried anything invisible. Whatever you felt, you carried on your back, and the whole world could see exactly how much. The town woke every morning the same way, slowly, warmly, under the weight of everything its people held. The merchants carried amber, heavy and leaning forward with it, the way ambition always leans. Young lovers moved through the market, carrying matching loads of rose pink that lit the cobblestones behind them like a blush. And the children carried almost nothing at all. Their burdens were pale and small, no heavier than a pillow, and they ran beneath them as if they had wings. Then there was the girl. Her name was Luma, and she was 9 years old, and the weight she carried was the deepest blue anyone in that town had ever seen. It rose above her head. It swirled at her feet. It dragged along the cobblestones behind her like a tide that had nowhere to go. People stepped around her gently when she passed through the market. They did not stare. They did not speak. They simply made room, the way you make room for something very large that has every right to be there. On her shoulder rode a small chameleon whose name was Pip. He had been with her since before the blue arrived, and now he wore it too. His scales the same deep cobalt as her grief. His 2 small eyes watching everything she could not bring herself to watch. It was Pip who noticed the sunflower first. And when Luma reached toward it, just barely, just the tips of her fingers, he turned the most surprised yellow. She almost smiled. The blue came back before she could finish. She heard children laughing in the square ahead and turned down an alley instead. She had learned to navigate by absence, finding the quiet spaces, the forgotten ones, the places where no one would have to step around her. It was how she found the courtyard. Overgrown, still, and at its center, on a wooden stool beside a dry fountain, a very old man sitting in a shape that looked like surrender. He carried nothing on his back, not a trace of color. And yet, somehow, he seemed the heaviest person Luma had ever seen. She crossed the courtyard slowly. He noticed her blue weight before he noticed her. His eyes traveling upward along its height, the way you look up at a building you have never stood beneath before. Then they came back down and found her face. Something in him shifted. Not much, just enough to begin. She asked him, without words, why he carried nothing. He told her that his weight had once been red. A brilliant painting red, he said. The red of someone who makes things, who loves what they are making, who has someone to make it for. He told her there had been a daughter, and that the daughter had gone, and that the day she left, the red had not grown, or darkened, or changed its shape the way grief was supposed to. Instead, he said, it had simply folded inward, turned grey, then turned to nothing anyone could see. But it had not become lighter. It had become heavier than anything visible. It had become the kind of weight that presses down without a name. When he finished, the courtyard was very quiet. Pip had turned a flat, muted grey on her shoulder. Luma sat down on the fountain's edge, not beside him exactly, but close. Close enough that the blue light of her weight reached him. They sat like that as the market sounds drifted over the walls, the world going on without them. 2 people at the very bottom of what they carried. She came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time she brought something small. Her mother's thimble, a river stone worn smooth, a flower pressed flat between 2 pages of a book she no longer read. She laid them in his open hand, one at a time, and he held each one the way a painter holds a colour he is trying to understand, eyes half closed, turning it slowly in the light. One afternoon, he brought out a sketchbook, old and worn, its cover soft with years of handling. He told her it had belonged to his daughter. He opened it to a page near the back. The drawing was of the ocean, seen from underneath, looking up through the water toward the surface, toward the light. And it was the same blue. Exactly, precisely, unmistakably the same blue as what Luma carried. She reached out and traced it with one finger. She did not say anything. She did not need to. And at that moment, for the first time since the blue had arrived, the weight's lower edge lifted 1 inch from the cobblestones. Just one, but it had never moved before. That evening, after she left, he sat alone in the quiet courtyard and reached beneath his stool and drew out a paintbrush he had not touched in many years. He did not paint. He only held it. But Pip, who had climbed to the courtyard wall to watch, turned for the first time a tentative and trembling gold. Once a year, the town held a remembrance festival, the one night when people carried their burdens to the square's edge and set them down, and tried to remember what it felt like to stand without anything on their backs. The weights rested in glowing piles along the walls, orange, rose, amber, green, pulsing softly, patient, waiting to be picked back up. The people danced, they stood taller, they breathed differently. Luma tried to put hers down. She reached back with both hands and gripped and pulled and strained, and the weight did not move at all. Not a single inch. It had come with her weight, so completely built, and that she could not separate the one from the other. She ran from the festival, through the back streets and out past the last lantern and into the dark forest at the edge of town. Pip chased her. In the forest, she stopped, and the weight pressed down, and the dark, soft earth of the forest floor began to give way beneath her, slowly, steadily, until she was ankle deep in the ground itself, the weight pulling her down into it, the way grief will pull you down if you stand too still in the dark. She looked upward at the enormous swirling blue above her and said, barely louder than the trees could hear, I just want to not feel it, just for one night without it. Pip turned red, the red of emergency, the red of alarm, and he looked at her, and then he looked towards the distant lights of the town, and then he ran, faster than she had ever seen him run. A small blazing point of red disappearing between the dark tree roots toward the courtyard. Aldric found her by following the blue light through the trees. When he arrived, he did not look at the weight. He did not assess the situation. He did not offer to help her lift it. He simply lowered himself to the ground beside her, in the wet, dark soil, and sat, getting muddy, at her level, as if sitting with was a thing he knew how to do. He told her then, the thing he had never told anyone. He told her that he had once tried to get rid of his invisible grief entirely, that he had visited healers and sages and people who claimed to know the geography of loss, that none of it had worked. What finally shifted it, he said, only slightly, only enough, was the day someone had asked him not to remove the grief, but to name what lived inside it. He told her, grief is not the opposite of love. It is love with nowhere to go. Your blue weight is not a punishment, Luma. It is the size of what you felt for her, made visible. It does not need to disappear. It needs somewhere to flow. He drew out his brush. He asked her to tell him one memory, just one. She told him about a morning when her mother had burned the bread and laughed at herself until she had to sit down, and how the kitchen had smelled of char and warmth at the same time, and how that smell was the thing she most often reached for and most often could not find. He painted it on the bark of the tree beside them, there in the dark by the cold blue light of her weight. A woman laughing, arms at her sides, head thrown back, painted in warm gold that glowed softly against the old bark. Luma's weight rose from her shoulders by 1 inch. Her feet lifted from the earth. She stood on solid ground. In the days that followed, she told him everything she could remember, and he painted everything she told him. Her mother braiding her hair in the rain, both of them laughing because the braid kept coming undone. Her mother's hands around a mug of tea in the early morning before anyone else was awake. Her mother pressing a flower into a book and forgetting which book, so that pressed flowers turned up everywhere for years. Her mother burning the bread. Her mother dancing to no music in the kitchen on a Tuesday. Her mother getting the name of every bird wrong on purpose to make Luma correct her. He painted them all, on the walls, the stones, the dry old fountain, in blue and gold, until the courtyard glowed like an underwater room, the light trembling as if the whole space were breathing. People began to stop at the gate. They looked in. Some of them wept for reasons they could not explain. A woman who had carried a grey burden for 9 years, the weight of a husband who had left, and of all the words she had never been able to say to him, set it down on the stones beside her, just for a moment, just to look. It was the first time she had put it down in 9 years. A boy stepped inside and pressed his hand to the painted wall, and the blue paint beneath his palm turned gold, spreading outward from the point of his touch, as if the warmth of a living hand was the thing the painting had been waiting for. People said afterward that the courtyard had become something sacred. Not a place that fixed things, a place where things were witnessed, and they were not entirely wrong. Aldric stood straighter that week than he had in many years. Not fully. The invisible weight was still there, but it had been seen. And being seen, they both had begun to learn, was not a small thing. Being seen was perhaps the only thing that changes the weight of anything at all. On the final morning, when she arrived at the courtyard, she found that Aldric had painted one last thing. It was a portrait of her. She was at the centre of it, small, bare-footed, dark-haired, and around her the blue moved differently, not pressing, not dragging. It spiraled around her in long, graceful arcs, the way water moves around a stone in a river, not stopped by the stone, but shaped by it, given direction by it, made more beautiful by the fact of it being there. And beneath the portrait, painted in gold, in letters that were imperfect and human and entirely his, were the words. She carried it because she loved greatly. She stood before it for a long time, and then she lifted her gaze, and her spine straightened. The weight was still there, every ounce of it. It had not shrunk. It had not faded or thinned or disappeared. She had not been healed of it the way people are healed of fevers. But she was standing upright beneath it. For the first time since it had arrived, she was fully upright, carrying it, not being crushed by it. Not the same thing. Not the same thing at all. On her shoulder, Pip changed colour. He cycled through everything, the blue, the grey, the green, the gold, as if reviewing everything he had witnessed. And then he settled into a colour that had no name yet. A soft, luminous violet, something between the blue and the gold, something that only exists after. Aldric stepped into the courtyard and saw her standing there. He said nothing. He did not need to say anything. He stood beside her, this old man and this small girl, in the middle of a room they had made together, out of memory and paint and the act of telling, surrounded by people who had come to be near something true. And the light that morning was the colour of both of them together. Blue and gold not fighting, not one swallowing the other, but held in the same air, warm as a heartbeat, trembling the way all living things tremble, briefly, and not without beauty. They said afterward that if you pressed your hand to the courtyard wall on a clear morning, you could feel something, not the paint, not the stone, something beneath that, the warmth of everything that had been put into words at last, and was still, somehow, warm.